In northern Iraq, all roads lead to the war zone. Military checkpoints are everywhere, as is the wreckage of bombs and artillery. The northernmost Iraqi city of Duhok is just 30 kilometers from the front in the ongoing war in Iraq and Syria, which makes the existence of the Duhok Zoo so remarkable, though it's not much to look at, with a camel, a bear, and a few monkeys, and one baby chimpanzee named Manno.
This is Performance Theory with Mike Clark.
Welcome back to Performance Theory. Today on the podcast, we have Spencer Sekyer, a teacher, philanthropist, and international volunteer. In his new memoir, Saving Manno, he describes what drove him to dedicate 3 years of his life to rescuing a chimpanzee named Manno from a zoo in Iraq. Fantastic book. I've now read it twice, a couple times through. Love it, every single minute of it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. That means a lot.
Now, you've had a busy couple months. You've been on the road. I see a lot on your social media. You've had CBC. I've seen stuff on the BBC, Global. You've been on the social. How has all these experiences been on the road for you?
Oh, it's all exciting. It's a little bit of a whirlwind, and it's funny when you're there. You're so focused on what you're doing at that moment, especially that, like we were just talking about off air, the live events where you're kind of you're operating without without a net. So if you screw up, it's significant. But no, it's been a lot of fun. To me, there's that aspect. It's especially when they rolled out the book launch. Simon and Schuster was just first class when they knew everything. It was a little bit rock star like, a little bit overwhelming in that regard. But to me, this has always been about a bigger vision, a bigger goal, and that's just not only to bring awareness to the issues of primate trafficking, saving my friend Manno, but also when people ask what the book's about, I always kind of defer to the last page where I'm talking to my students, and it's your life is an empty page waiting to be written, an untouched canvas. So go paint your masterpiece with a palette of kindness. And to me, if I was to imprint a theme, that would be the theme. I recognize not everyone's going to have a trafficked chimpanzee come across their life, but in living your best life, to be prepared for when life throws you things, to be able to act and just to be the best person you can be.
And that's one of the things I really like about the book is it's not just Manno's story. It's building up. It takes, right from you growing up. It goes through you talking to your students. And then it goes to your current situation where you were saving Manno, going back and forth. And we mentioned this before the podcast. I really like that because it gave you a background history to each section of the book without going through history all at the beginning of the book.
Right, and as far as that part of it, like when I sat down and had the meeting with Simon and Schuster and said, they think that this is a really good story, and I think we could turn this to brand. I was very upfront. So I'm not a writer. They said, don't worry, we'll have people help you with that. And that's exactly what they did. My co-author Omar Muallim, and then Simon Schuster, the editing team at Simon and Schuster, were miraculous. I mean, that's how they, constructed the book in such a fashion, in a manner that I, to be frank, wouldn't have been able to do that. My story, in a lot of it, I wrote a lot more than I thought I would, to be honest. But as far as the structure of the book, that's them, and they are the geniuses that kind of produce that. And we were really happy in the end with the final result and product.
Now, growing up, you mentioned the book. You were an athlete. From there, you became a phys ed teacher. What led you to switch more to social studies?
Well, some of it, as mentioned in the book, some of it was really not planned, and that's throughout the book. Another one of the themes, that you'd like to imprint is don't close doors, because you never know what future roads might hold. I was really happy teaching phys ed. I wasn't overly excited initially. I enjoyed teaching social studies, taking social studies, but to teach it, I wasn't really excited initially. But once that was part of my teaching, load or program. I wanted to be the best that I could be, first of all, and second of all, I wanted to teach from experience. So, not that I was a great athlete. I would say I had achieved like moderate level of status with athletics. I played some football at the University of Alberta for the Golden Bears, and I played a little bit of junior A hockey. But by no means was I an amazing athlete. But I had enough of a background that I felt I could impart that on my students. I wanted to do the same thing with social studies, to not just teach from the lectern, to not just teach from a textbook, to actually go and bring these experiences back to my students. There's a line in the movie Good Will Hunting, where Robin Williams' character is talking to Will Hunting, Matt Damon's character, and saying, you're a genius, and you've got all this knowledge, but do you know what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel? And I just thought, that's what it's about, is these experiences, to bring them, to life for the students and attach, emotions to these places. Now I know what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel because I've been there. It smells like sweaty tourists. So I initially I wasn't real excited about teaching social, but it was another one of those things that life just put it in front of me. And we live our life, looking forward, but we understand our life looking in retrospect. And now you see all these events that were, standalone events, and now you understand how they've kind of come together to bring you to this point in my journey, and it's worked out pretty well. Like it's been a perfect, and that was part of it. Like if I wouldn't have moved to social studies, I likely would have been traveling to all these, sometimes dangerous or exotic places, and I wouldn't have come across Manno, and even step further, different experiences I had within Africa at chimpanzee sanctuaries that I just did out of interest. But that planted the seed later when I came across Manno, that I realized, this isn't going to end well for anybody. So it's just, for me, interesting. The book is an arc, and hopefully the reader gets a little bit of that out of it as well, as you never know what the future holds,
Exactly. So your first international teaching experience was in Sierra Leone. How much of a culture shock was it heading into that country?
Well, huge is an understatement. One of the reasons why we took, where I picked Sierra Leone, was because they supposedly spoke English, which they do technically, but it's Creole. How's the body fine? So I'd go there, and they're speaking Creole, which is kind of a pidgin English. I can understand anything. So that and interest as well. I think that was shortly after the movie Blood Diamond, which was I just found a fascinating movie. And it was shortly after the Civil War they had in Sierra Leone. And I wanted the full-on experience, and as well as, to be honest, just pragmatically, they were the first people to get back to me. So I'm okay, that's where I'm going to go. It was so eye-opening, and it was one of the most difficult experiences I've had, or I had up to that point, but also one of the most rewarding. And I think what it did, Mike, is that at that time when I went, it was ranked as the second least, by the United Nations, ranked as the second least livable place on the planet. And I think what that did is, and now having been there, I see why it was, but I think what it did is made all the other trips after seem easier in comparison, because when you start off at the second worst place, everything else is okay. I've handled this before, I've done this before, I got this, and so that was part of it. And then just, it was so rewarding where you're leaving a place where they have so little, and yet they're magical in other ways. They talk, they make eye contact, they're grateful, they sing, and they had such gratitude for, out of my pocket, like when I got water in the school, something that was, a few $100s, and kids are bawling.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I said you wrote in the book that a small investment of 150 US made a vast difference in the students by bringing water to the school. And to them, that was a major thing that they thought was unattainable.
Right. At that point, the kids are, going to the bathroom in a little ditch across the playground, and so the language barrier was part of it. So I went in, the weekend before I started teaching, going through the entire curriculum, and I'm going to have, be prepared. And then I went in front of the kids, they call their teachers aunts and uncles. I'm Uncle Spencer, I'm from Canada, and there's a beach ball, with a print of the world on it. And I'd point to Canada. Everyone say Canada, Canada. Who am I? They all say Canada. So the point being is the language barrier was significant enough. I went to the headmaster, Marietta, and said, you know what? Like, I'm not really doing anything when I'm here as far as teaching. Don't get me wrong, it was positive. Your novelty, the teachers were wonderful, the kids were great. It was a lot of fun. But what can I do to help? And so we made a list, and we just started knocking things off the list. One of the number one thing, obviously, was water. However many million Leones, and it ended up being like $150, $160 easy. And that small investment, has such a large impact going forward. So, and like I said, and just their gratitude, it had such an impact on me. It's like, this is what I'm going to do.
Do we underestimate the difference that one person can make?
I think that's all an individual thing. I mean, was the father of modern day chiropractic, was it D.D. Palmer? Says, you never know something you say, however you might think it's small, something you say, think, or do now can affect the lives of millions tomorrow. And I just always kind of take that credo, drops of goodness. Maybe it's holding the door open for somebody, right? Maybe it's saving that fly from the water bowl. I just always try and just put as much goodness into the universe as I can, and one hopes that's a larger existential question, but I think so. If we all had that attitude, I mean, you think of these individuals throughout history, or even throughout our contemporary lives, that have done remarkable things, So, I think so. I hope so.
How did your students react to your first experience overseas?
They were good. Some of it is was the tactical maneuver of in Alberta. We're really heavy laden with curriculum, so there's a course that you've got to get through. And so usually when I'd come back, I'd do a PowerPoint or do a little presentation of wherever I was that summer, Sierra Leone or the West Bank, Afghanistan, Somalia, wherever it may be. And then after that, you just kind of start to throw out the anecdotes, right? As you're teaching a class, you throw out something here or there, and you hope, whatever. And it's funny, as a teacher, some kids you never thought you'd reach, or something, kids come to you like 10, 15, 20 years later. You really had an impact on my life when you said this, and I have no memory of saying any of it, right? So you just hope, just plant the seeds, plant as many seeds as you can,
So you came from a hunting family, didn't grow up with pets. So where did this passion for animals come from?
Well, yeah, and that's was an interesting part, of my arc as a person. Is my family still hunts, so I've gone vegetarian. So, and a lot of people will be anti-hunting, but say, hey man, unless you're going vegetarian or vegan, then you hunt too. You just hunted Sobeys, right? So what happened is, so we grew up as a hunting family, and we didn't have a pet. I mean, there's a couple stray cats that hung around our house that we, fed a little bit, but no pets to speak of. But it was a girlfriend. A girlfriend wanted a dog at the time. And so we got this dog, and I said, okay, if we get a dog, let's get like a little one, a Shih Tzu or something. She wanted a Malamute, that require a lot of discipline, and Malamutes are not for, the faint of heart dog owner. They're very experienced dog owners. They're very strong-willed, very athletic. And long story short is the girl left and the dog stayed and fell in love with the animal and opened up feelings and emotions in me that I never thought would exist with an interspecies relationship. And so that's, again, little things happen in your life that you may not plan, and then later, you're in Sierra Leone or wherever, and you see these dogs that are in terrible situations. You think, well, how is this any different than my dog? And you realize that they're much smarter. I believe, and I think most people that have got animals would agree, that they're much smarter than we give them credit for.
In 2010, you rescued 7 dogs from Kabul, Afghanistan. Outside of just rescuing the dogs, how safe did you feel in Kabul? Because one of my friends served in Kabul, and they were instructed not even to leave the base because of risk. So obviously, you're going to stand out in their community.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I usually end up going to small or even medium-sized NGOs, is because you have a lot more agility. You can go out and a lot more freedom. And granted, like especially our military men and women, or people that are there on larger NGOs, because you're a target, to be blunt. But to me, it's pretty hard to do humanitarian work when you're walled off from the locals in a compound. And usually when I go to places, because I went to some places that are not considered particularly safe, I'm always nervous going in. Matter of fact, my first night in Afghanistan, I remember I slept with a knife under my pillow, just in case. But it's funny because when you're there longer, at first you're on high alert, but then it's funny how things suddenly become normalized. And really, one of the biggest lessons I've learned is wherever you go in the world, even in war zones, they're no different than us. They want their kids to do well. You go about your day-to-day business, and we just end up coping. What ends up happening many times in Kabul or in Afghanistan, there'll be nothing for a long period of time, like months, and then there'll be a VBED, like a vehicle inborn explosive device, will go off, or RPG will get shot at a hotel or something, or there'll be massive casualties, but then it'll be quiet for a while. So sometimes they flare up. So when I was there, it just so happened there was a certain Secretary of State, Miss Clinton, was in town when I was, and they shut that whole place down. And probably wasn't the best idea, and I don't think they were happy that I was out wandering the streets. But like I said, it was like you go halfway around the world to interact with people and to help people. It's hard to do when you're walled in a compound with a bunch of expatriates. So yeah.
How did you come to meet Manno?
Well, that was another serendipitous story. So that was another thing that was just happened. So just to rewind a little bit, so I was helping, I would go over and teach in these areas and help, locals and teach the kids. When I was in Afghanistan, I was teaching street kids. But there's a mother dog outside my house who had puppies. Long story short, as you alluded to, I ended up getting them back here and getting them adopted. And just kind of started to realize wherever I'd go in the world, Mike, I'd end up looking after some puppy or some stray kittens or something. I realized my passion is really animals. That's what I love. I love helping people. I love teaching. I love helping people that are in need. But more than anything, I love animals. So one Christmas break, I went to the northern Iraqi city of Duhok to help a veterinarian, Dr. Suleiman Tamir, who's basically doing their version of an SPCA, spay and neuter program. Lots of strays. When they're in tough situations, he'll take them, he'll fix them. So I went over for my Christmas break to help him when I transitioned over to helping animals. And again, this is one of those weird things that when it never happened, he put me up in this one hotel that was terrible. It reeked like cigarette smoke, didn't have any Wi-Fi, and I'm like, I'm out of here. So went out to a taxi driver and kind of mimed, I don't speak Kurdish, and he brings me to this other hotel, the Dilshad Palace, that ended up just happened to be a short distance from their zoo. I'd went to the zoo like the day earlier. The doctor had a call, again, just by coincidence there, so I met them. Had my mornings free, so I'm like, oh, I'm halfway around the world, what am I going to do? So I walked down the street, I would walk in the zoo. And what I explain to people, the only thing that I can come up with is something got lost in translation. I think they thought I was a veterinarian because I was there with the vet. And, they welcome me in this zoo, and I go in this confectionery store, and there's a baby chimpanzee ripping apart, bags of sunflower seeds or whatever. They put them in my arms. And I'm like, what a great, cool experience. I'm taking selfies, to share with my wife and my students. And then I look around the room and everyone's gone. It's like, this is such a cool experience, so I'll take this. So the chimpanzees, much like humans, need that physical connection. And at that time, Manno was probably, I don't know, under a year old, maybe a year old. And so I just started taking care of him. Started going back each day, right? And so I'd walk in the zoo, and wherever Manno was, he'd come barreling over, jump in my arms, and we developed a bond. So how I explain to people is however close you feel to, an animal, a dog or cat, what have you, to me it was like it's a different level with a primate, perhaps because they're so close to us, genetically. But it was almost, and now having a son, it is really uncanny how human-like they are and how much they are like infants. Now that is part of their charm and part of their curse, because with that, people want to take them in, dress them up like little babies, and then when they get older, 6, 7, is when they become dangerous or even deadly.
So what are some of the misconceptions with chimps? I've heard you mention in other interviews that they're very playful, but as they get older, they can become very, very dangerous.
Deadly even. So just a couple of anecdotes that I share. So when I went to a place called Takugama in Sierra Leone when I was teaching there, and it didn't happen when I was there, it happened about a year earlier. Their alpha Bruno got out and he killed a man. I was at another place called in the Democratic Republic of Congo, again just for a few days out of interest when I was in Africa, and Lolia bonobo. Bonobos are basically like chimps, but they're smaller. They call them pygmy chimps, and they're supposedly less aggressive. This happened the day I arrived. I didn't see it happen, but it happened the day I arrived. So they have, enclosures with groups of chimps, but they're releasing a group of chimpanzees into the wild into the wild to reintroduce them to the wild. They've got 2 guys with machine guns with them to protect them from the bushmeat hunters. And for whatever reason, whatever set them off, they attacked these 2 guys and ripped their faces off, ripped them off.
Wow.
And they survived. But, the damage was catastrophic. And so these things that happened, again, later, when Manno is going to get older, this is not, they're too strong, they're too intelligent, and they're too unpredictable to have as pets, it's especially when they get older. So that was part of my motivation of, to get Manno somewhere while he was still relatively young and he could be integrated. That and as well, and this goes for entertainment chimps as well, straight across the board. And so when we see chimps in the media, we'll usually see entertainment chimps. And those are always baby chimps. Because as they get older, they're too strong, they're too dangerous, as we're talking about, and too unmanageable. But in every case, those animals are taken from their families or their mothers. In most cases, when they go in, they've got to kill the entire family. So when they're taken from the wild, like Manno was, they kill the entire family, and then they sell the chimpanzee at a local market for $50, $100, whatever. And as it works up the way up the food chain, so the zoo owner in Duhoc paid $15,000 American for it, for Manno. And so that's, it's now being exposed to it, it's $1 billion industry as far as illegal animal trafficking.
Yeah, in the book you mentioned that in some of those countries it's still common to give exotic pets as gifts between people.
All the time. Like I said, there's one thing that happened. It's a scene in the book where I landed in Dubai when I was, when I had Manno with me when I was relocating him to Sweet Waters in Kenya. And we landed in Dubai at one airport, and we went to a separate airport about an hour away, and we were separated. I wasn't able to go with him before our flight the next morning to Kenya. So next morning I get up and I find where they have they're keeping their animals, which was not an easy feat, but I found it. So I went in and said, I'm here to see my chimpanzee. And the guy goes, he said, the chimp left 5 days ago. Like, what? It was a different chimp. So that to me, you know, kind of set up a red flag that this is so pervasive that we have no idea. Go on Instagram. You'll be able to find, you know, rich sheiks or whatever in the Arab region, in the Arab Gulf or the Arab states. They have cheetahs like we have house cats. Like, it's crazy. And chimpanzees are part of this as well, because when they're young, they're cute, they're fun, but they're unmanageable.
What were the conditions like at the zoo? So I read in the book that Manno was in a black wire cage, and then when he did get put in that cage, it was on top of a box that housed snakes.
Right. So what would happen is Manno was usually with a caretaker in the mornings, and in that case it was me. But then, like, was so high maintenance, and they've got other jobs to do. So what they would do is they would put Manno in this bird cage, and he hated it. And again, not to bash other parts or other regions of the world, because I mean, zoos straight across the board. And first of all, let's be upfront. There's two kinds of zoos. There's credited zoos, and there's zoos that are not credited. And so many of the zoos here in Canada, North America, like the Calgary Zoo or what have you, Edmonton Zoo, are far better than these zoos in different regions. But it was basically like cement cages, or cement prisons, really. And when I found out all the animals there had been taken from the wild, it was very upsetting to me. So yeah, Manno was stuck in this cage. And what Manno was, he had a sleeping cage, and his sleeping cage was on top of these snakes that were in a big crate, and he absolutely hated it. He went ballistic when they tried to put him on there. So, but it's not to mischaracterize that they didn't abuse Manno per se. They loved that animal. The zoo owner and the caretakers loved that animal, and he had veterinarian care. They were fed. The cages were cleaned, daily. There's often refuse in there during the day, but so not to make them into bad guys.
Yeah.
But it certainly is not like a zoo here, for sure.
How important were your previous experiences in developing a plan to get Manno out of the zoo?
Well, again, it's just all these things. For sure, the dogs, the whole situation when I got the dogs over from Afghanistan. Patience, bureaucracy, and a lot of luck, a lot of stuff that I can't take credit for. A group of really helpful people, willing to help. You can't do it. I could have never done this alone. A very supportive, family system. My wife, Christy, couldn't do this without her. She gives me her blessing, to go on these crazy adventures. So, all these things kind of come together, and it's funny because, I just have this, I have no training as far as apes or animals, and I don't think I'm very special in any way. I'm just an ordinary person. But I seem to have one, trait that sees me through these things, and I'm pretty relentless. Like when I set my mind to something, I for whatever it is, better or for worse, I won't give up. And so that has always been, that athletics has probably taught me is, put your best foot forward. And so all that's helped. But all these little scenarios all kind of culminated together to make this happen.
So in your efforts to get him out of there, you emailed numerous zoos, foundations, organizations. How many of those, out of all the ones that you emailed, actually got back to you? Very few.
And there were there were a few people that got back to me, and well-meaning. And that was part of the thing, is people were quick to criticize them. Like, get in the game and do something. If this, if something is moving you so much to put forth a criticism, then do what it takes to make the situation better. But yeah, I probably sent out dozens for sure. And the ones but I just that relentless nature, I just kept on going. Whenever something, I'd send it out to a zoo, send it out to the Toronto Zoo, send it out to the WWE, whoever. And most of them were, they get, just a form email back saying, yeah, we can't help. And part of it is because the regulations on moving primates is so strict, which I support. But it also made the red tape, a lot of red tape. But no, most of them I would guess probably under 1% got back to me.
Wow. In moving him out of there, I know that you had asked the actual zoo owner, I believe it was, to release him, and instead he offered to sell him.
Right.
Correct?
Right. Well, I don't think it was offered to sell him as much as when I went in. I said, like, we've got to get him to a better situation, and what he said, he wanted his $15,000 American he paid for him, his investment. Like, he's not going to give that up just for free. So it wasn't that he was trying to sell him per se. It was like, yeah, I'll let him go, but you know what, you're gonna, you have to pay me something. Now that brings in the whole ethical conundrum of, do you pay? Because we wouldn't pay, because if you do pay, then what happens? He goes out and buys another one, and all you're doing is perpetuating this. Not to say that, that might not have to happen in the future. So it's that ethical issue. Do you pay something to save a life, even though you're making the greater problem worse? I don't know. We were very lucky in the situation with Manno that in one of these emails, online relationships, somebody put me in touch with Cheryl Bernard, who this would not have been possible without. Cheryl is an author, an academic, and her husband was close personal friends. And again, one of those serendipitous, situations that I can have take no credit for. But if this doesn't happen, this doesn't get done. So her husband used to be an American ambassador under the Bushes to Iraq, amongst other places, and was close personal friends with Barzani, the Kurdish prime minister. And it was that relationship. So Cheryl's sitting down, for dinner with Barzani, the Kurdish PM, and is like, and by the way, he was also an animal lover, and he's like, so there's this chimpanzee in Duhok, and she kind of laid, this whole story, he'd been taken from his mother, etc. And so Barzani was very sympathetic. He's like, yeah, let's get him out. Yeah, we'll get him out. But now we had to keep that quiet too, because he's got this whole thing brewing right now with ISIS. So he's perceived as, well, you're helping chimpanzees, but not your own. So we had to keep that quiet as well. But point being, we had a means to get Manno out, but because of the regulations, we had nowhere for him to go. And that took years before, I finally met Jane Goodall. So
then you did meet Jane Goodall at a book signing in Edmonton. How instrumental was she in moving the process forward?
Well, again, this wouldn't happen without Jane Goodall, right? So when you have someone of the stature of Jane Goodall, once she attaches her name to something, then things really started to happen. Jane was doing a speaking event at the Windspear, and so I stood in line like everyone else to get my book signed, and had my my spiel down in a picture of Manno on my phone to my 10-second FaceTime with her and said, yeah, this is Manno. I looked after him. He's smuggled. We have nowhere for him to go. And then she put me in touch with her people, and like I said, once Jane was involved, things really started to move. Probably still took 6 months after that. But yeah, no, if Jane doesn't give her blessing, this doesn't happen.
What convinced the zoo owner to finally release Manno?
Well, it was funny because, Barzani, first of all, when the Kurdish prime minister came in, we found this out after, so Barzani actually offered or agreed to pay the $15,000, and we didn't find this out till much later. When we went back, I went back subsequently in writing the book. Omar and I went back to Iraq, and according to Ramadan, the zoo owner, he said, I never ever did get the money. So I don't know if it was a ruse, if so much happened with ISIS in northern Iraq and Kurdistan, if they ran out of funds. I don't know what the story was, and I'll never know the true story. This is all hearsay, so that was kind of part of the postscript that we found out afterwards.
So you went back in November 2016, and a third of Iraq had been seized by ISIS. What was the atmosphere in the country as compared to the first couple times you were there?
Right, so that's when it had gotten much worse. So the first time I was there, it was enough of a of a place to go to where people would raise their eyebrows and say, "You're going where? Like, aren't they having, like, isn't there a war going on?" But at that time, ISIS didn't even have its moniker yet of ISIS. But then fast forward when we went back the second time, the fiercest fighting on the planet was in Mosul, and it was just a few kilometers away from Duhok. So that made things difficult because no one wanted to go in. But that was our window. We really didn't have a choice. So when I went back, it was a lot more intense. There's a lot more security checks. It was just, everything is just heightened exponentially now because you have this war going on that's now escalated, and I believe it was probably the biggest war in the country at that time, or the fiercest fighting, like I said. So yeah, it was intense.
I can only imagine, since you're only 85 kilometers away from that ISIS front.
Yeah, it was very close, and so, but the whole regions was controlled by the Kurds, aka the good guys, and so they had their checkpoints up every so often and whatnot, and so you had to go through certain areas. Strong military presence, and yeah, but once you're there, I mean, we were so focused on the whole process of getting them out. It's almost once I get to a place, you just get, your feet hit the ground and you start running. My nervousness is usually going in. Like I have the butterflies and think, what have I got myself into? But once you're there, it's like you're just focused on, okay, what's the next task? We got to do this, then we got to do this, then we got to do this. And it just, adaptability is humanity's greatest asset, right? So you just adapt to the situation.
Once you managed to negotiate Manno's release from the zoo, not everything went as planned. The crate didn't fit into the vehicle. You no longer had air transportation for him.
We ran out of gas. No, we didn't run out of gas. The truck stalled at one point, and this was early on. So yeah, so we try and get the crate in. Crate doesn't fit. They bring back another vehicle. Takes another hour. Crate is kind of jimmy rigged in there, all crooked. We're leaving to go to right through this war zone, and the truck stalls. We have to push start it, and then we get Manno and got him in the crate. We're moving him. And there was only one flight a week leaving from Erbil, which is the town that we were going from. It was about a 3-hour drive from Duhok, where Manno was, going right through the war zone per se. It's at night, it's dark. Jason Meyer from Animals Lebanon, who is, again, when you say you surround yourself with good people, this doesn't happen without Jason and his wife Maggie. I mean, he did all the I never moved a chimpanzee before. He built the crate and did the paperwork and arranged flights. So there's one flight a week going from Erbil to Dubai to catch the flight to Kenya. And they phoned us, and someone had dropped the ball. And it was Emirates, the airline, and we have no payment. So that chimpanzee's going nowhere. And so here we are going to be, like, Manno was in a crate, but you can't keep him in a crate for a week. You're in a war zone for a week with a chimpanzee, with not proper facilities. I mean, to me, I was already so invested, it was never even a question. So I'll stay. And through Jason's diplomacy, he worked it out. And so I think what ended up happening was Emirates kind of said, okay, we'll let him go, and they squared up later. And at that point, I was going to release, so Manno was going to get on the plane, and he was going to go to Kenya, where they're going to pick him up and do the whole thing. And I still to this day don't know who paid for my flight. I have no idea who did. But Jason turned around and goes, "You're going to Kenya with him." I said, okay. So, and my wife had already booked my flights back home to Canada. So I called Christy, said, "I'm going to Kenya." So that's how that kind of happened. But it was stressful for sure when you're driving through a war zone. It's pitch black, and you're going, yeah, this chimpanzee's not going anywhere. So, but it ended up working out fine.
And then he did go missing there for a little bit, as you alluded to earlier, right? You couldn't find him in the cargo?
Right. So if you've ever been to the Dubai airport, there's a whole section called Cargo City. So I I'm in this huge area cargo city, and my flight leaves that morning. You know, you talk to the booking agent at Emirates, and they're like, "No, you can't go back there." It's like, okay, next. You know, this person isn't giving me the right answer. Again, it's that relentless nature that might not make me the most pleasant person to deal with at times, but I just refuse to take no for an answer at times. So anyway, long story is I get in a cab and we mime our way there, and I just start knocking on doors. And yeah, where is he? So my flight's leaving in a half an hour, and Manno's going to be on that. This time he's not in a cargo plane, he's in a passenger plane, and he's going to be in the cargo section. So it's like, if I don't get back in time, I'm going to miss this flight. Ended up finding out where they keep the animals, and went in and saw him, and he was doing fine. A little bit tired, but really was really remarkable in how resilient he was. You know, to be kept in. I think he's in the crate for probably 2 or 3 days, but he did really well. Yeah.
And then when you finally did arrive at Sweetwaters, you found out that he had to be under a 4-month quarantine.
Right. Well, at that time, we didn't know if it was going to be 2 or 3 or 4 months. And my vision was I'd spent the last 3 years with this. I was going to see him through. He needed that friendly face with him. And they're like, you're going nowhere. Like, after he landed, you know, there's a big mob of people, you know, reporters from BBC and Al Jazeera and CNN or wherever. And it was like a big media scrum. And obviously a big event, and then all of a sudden, you know, I get kicked out of the back of the truck where Manno was, and when we arrived at Sweetwaters, I just had a vision I was going to be with him, and they're like, no. Which, and I threw a little bit of a tantrum, and I'm not real proud of how I acted, to be honest, but in retrospect, it made me feel much better, because I knew then that they actually took it seriously, you know, and that this is serious business. And he laid it out. He goes, if something goes wrong and this doesn't work, because Manno at that time was the first chimp, because it's since the Ebola epidemic that they actually let in. If this doesn't go well, they'll euthanize him. You know, no. So you got to put your ego aside and do what's best for the animals. It's okay. I'm out. And then when he was released from quarantine a few months later, I actually went back. They contacted me, and I went back for that, which was a whole episode in itself as well.
Yeah, you say in the book that his integration didn't go as smoothly as they would have liked, and you actually did get to see him again.
Right.
And that's where, if you go on social media, you do see a couple pictures at the sanctuary, and he jumped into your arms.
Right. So that's usually the one I'll say is on YouTube. There's a video of Manno. So he was freaked out, because at that point he had, you know, likely he thought he was human. He was raised by humans at that time, you know, spent his life around humans and hadn't been around chimpanzees. So anyone that's been around a group of chimpanzees, they're so loud, Mike, so aggressive, so powerful. They're intimidating, and he was freaked out. So he wasn't doing well, and there was a researcher from the Max Planck Institute said, let him go in. They didn't want to let me go in because they thought it would like delay the whole process, the whole integration process. And so they relented and let me go in. And that's the scene where he comes down and jumps in my arms. For me, when people ask if it was worth it, does he remember me, that's a video I'll play. That to me was a magical moment. But our job wasn't done. And again, just to fold back to how aggressive chimps are, they had tried and introduced a male earlier, and the alpha killed the male. So there's no guarantee that this was going to go well. With all the world now media attention, everyone were on, you know, high stress, because you imagine the criticism. You go and do this, and if things don't end well. So what they do is they bring in a female until they start to kind of, you know, bond. And Manno wasn't having it at first. So there was one female that had, you know, adopted a few others, but he was freaked out by her. And so I had to leave. I came back, and then when I got that you know, video in my inbox of him tickling a younger chimpanzee called Jane, they're playing. It's like, okay, we're there. And they bring in another female, another female, and then he's got his girls surrounding him. And then they release him in the enclosure adjacent to the males for a time before they let them in. So that's kind of how that whole process works.
What's Manno's life like today?
Well, so what happened was, what I tell people is, outside of Manno being raised and having a life in the wild, which was now no longer possible because he was so imprinted as being a human, he would have never survived. But outside of that scenario where he's left in the wild, this is as good as I ever could have dreamed. Like when I started this off, I thought, well, if we could even get him in a zoo, you know, a North American zoo, a European zoo, an accredited zoo, you know, that would be a huge win. But how his life now is as good as could be expected. So Sweetwater's are massive enclosures of the forest where he lives with a group of chimpanzees and is groomed and as close to nature as possible, and they're fed. You know, they have veterinary care. So it really it's been a Disney ending, Mike, and I couldn't have, and again, not that I can take no credit for this, through the help of a lot of really amazing people and a lot of events, the universe conspired to help us. It could not have worked out any better in this situation.
Now, not everybody's going to be brave enough to embark on the same journey as you. So what can somebody do to help?
Well, as far as this specific situation, as far as chimpanzees, and this is part of it, so I do donate a portion of the book, Saving Manno, does go to the chimpanzee care at Sweetwater's, because even with that, it costs like $40,000 a year to raise a chimpanzee. So it sounds like a cliche, but donations. I mean, that's with chimps. There's all sorts of organizations, Sweetwater's, PASA. You can get involved through volunteering. If your jam isn't chimpanzees, get online, find something. It might be donating, it might be volunteering your time, it might be going on a trip, it might be doing whatever. It's like drops of goodness in the bucket of life is what I say. You know, paint your masterpiece, you know, with a palette of kindness. Just do good things, you know. But to me, to get involved, life is not a spectator sport. Get in the game. You know, if you're passionate about something, get involved.
Where are your travels taking you next?
Well, since I got back and this, you know, got a little bit of attention, people send me stuff all the time, sometimes about stuff like you know, the wolf killer, the grizzly bear, and it's like, you're missing the point, man. Like, you can't dump all this on me I love animals, but this is part of the whole, you know, theme of the book is to get involved in life. But what did happen was I got 2 emails on the exact same day about this chimpanzee Simon in a West African country called Guinea-Bissau. And so to me that was kind of a sign, you know, from 2 totally separate people telling me about the same chimpanzee. And it's like, so I contacted Sweetwater's, and they said, yeah, we'll take him, you know. And apparently the owners, there's a girl there, Lara Esprita Santos, who has basically taken my role with Simon, this chimpanzee that I had with Manno, and she's been the driving force and amazing. And so she said the owners of the chimp they're recognizing they can't keep him, so they're willing to give him up. Sweetwater's is willing to help him. I think this is awesome. So I'll go back, I'll make this happen. This was last August. So I arrive in Guinea-Bissau, you know, to help move this chimp or start the process. I found 3 other chimpanzees, so there's 4. So here we are, and I thought we could get it done. Here we are a year later, and we're still working on this process. So it's not easy, but I won't rest until, you know, we get a positive result for these animals, whatever that may be. But as the process is unfolding.
Now, in all your travels, what's your favorite food, and what's your least favorite food that you've had?
Favorite food? Well, they all have got their culinary delights, right? And so there's people, I gotta say, I love Arabic food. Even in Thailand, I'm not real good at spicy food, but when you're actually in the culture and you eat, like, man, Thai food's pretty sensational as well. But on the flip side, I think it was cockroaches I was eating in Thailand when I was in Thailand. So, I mean, wherever you go, the food is so sensational. But I gotta watch too, because I got a real sensitive stomach, so sometimes I don't do so well in these places. But
I want to thank Spencer Sekyer for joining us on the podcast today. Where can people find your book, Saving Manno?
Amazon for sure. Indigo Chapters, local bookstores. Amazon, I know, has got a bunch of online. They were sold out a little while ago, but I think they have some more. That would probably be your best bet.
If anybody wants us to reach out to you on social media, where can they find you?
My Spencer Sekyer author page. I do presentations all the time, and be more than happy to talk to your group or organization, and hopefully, can imprint on them some of the lessons that I learned throughout this whole process of volunteerism, surrounding yourself with good people, and just basically sticking with a goal.
Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys, for listening. Please share this podcast and make sure you subscribed, because a bunch of you are listening haven't passed it on to your friends. Find me on social media at MikeClarkLife on all major platforms, or visit MikeClarkLife.com.